I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. This week, I asked Abhi Janamanchi, the senior minister at Cedar Lane Unitarian-Universalist Church in Bethesda, and Steven Cenname, a lay leader and Sunday school teacher in St. Mary's Catholic Church in Rockville, how their congregations were affected by the pandemic, how they responded, and what the future looks like. I'd expected to learn that all churches had a similar experience, and in many ways they did. But I was surprised by how doctrinal differences showed up in how the two congregations responded to the lockdown and other constraints imposed by the pandemic. And the difference was in fact quite dramatic. If you are new to the show, I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. It is my hope that this podcast will help those who feel left out reconnect in our local communities. Music for this episode comes from Two Truths, a Rochester, New York-based electronic Americana band led by composers Blake Pattengale and Garrett Mader. Mader grew up in Montgomery County and is named after Garrett Park in Kensington. They are accompanied by Max Greenberg on keyboards and Byron Cage on drums. The song, Brushstrokes, can be found on YouTube. The band's first EP, Electric Campfire, comes out this month.
When I was a younger man, I chased you through the fields that we painted with soft brushstrokes. Now I sit in my old age.
We haven't done a news roundup in a couple of weeks as we presented Gaithersburg City Council and mayoral candidates. If you live in Gaithersburg or have friends who live in Gaithersburg, early voting is October 23rd and 24th, and Election Day is November 2nd. In a programming note, after a bunch of education episodes, I was very excited to welcome Montgomery County Board of Education President Brenda Wolf and MCPS Superintendent Manifa McKnight to an interview October 29th. The interview had been set up 2 months ago in August as the new school year was starting. This week, I was told that we needed to find a new time for the interview months later in spring of 2022. Here is to hoping they will reconsider and come on sooner than the end of the school year. If you have questions about the school system, email the show at ihppod@gmail.com and we'll try to answer your questions. The biggest news from Montgomery County is about redistricting. This year, because of delays in the release of census data, the 10-year periodical redistricting process had been pushed back. In Montgomery County, County Council, federal, state districts, and even school board districts were all to be redistricted. The different levels of redistricting have their own processes. The federal redistricting, for example, is a responsibility of the state legislature, which is expected to meet in a special session in the first or second week of December to pass the new maps. The state legislature is also responsible for its own redistricting, but Governor Larry Hogan took a shot across the bow by suggesting maps that would make some big changes. The General Assembly holds this power, so expect considerable differences between the Democratic legislative maps and the Republican Hogan ones. Within the County Board of Education worked out its own maps and suggested them to a committee of state reps constituted to look into it. The committee is chaired by Delegate Emily Shetty, with Senator Nancy King and Delegates Vaughn Stewart and David Fraser Hidalgo as members. It seems likely that the delegation committee will approve a plan to alter the BOE districts minimally, balancing population, but leaving the old districts largely in place. The BOE did not recommend an expansion to the number of districts, a process that the county council is going through right now. Meanwhile, Delegate David Moon is planning a local Montgomery County bill to end at-large voting for BOE districts and replace it with in-district voting. This has been a long-held source of confusion about how BOE voting works. While candidates have to live in one of the 5 districts, all county voters vote for all district candidates. David Moon's bill would end at-large voting for these district seats, and only those who live in a district will be able to vote for that district member. The 2 at-large positions will continue to be as they were, candidates from anywhere, and every voter in the county votes for them. Most of the redistricting energy is focused on county council districts, where because of a 2020 referendum, the number of districts is going up from 5 to 7. After weeks of deliberation, the County Redistricting Commission this week added 2 new districts and voted to send to the County Council a map that created a Black plurality district in the eastern part of the county, a Hispanic plurality district centered on Wheaton and Aspen Hill, and rebalance the population across the rest of the county. This means that the top 2 minority groups, Blacks at 18% and Latinos at almost 20%, should be able to elect a county council member each. Asians, who make up about 15% of the county's population, did not get a district with plurality. Of all the council districts, District 1 will be the most dramatically transformed because of fast growth in the population. The story is not over yet. The commission tried to push forward a unanimous recommendation, but Commissioner Jason Maxstein, who had offered a different map than the one that was recommended, dissented. The county council has the final say on what the districts will look like, and the scene now shifts there. Watch for what Council Member Andrew Friedson, the incumbent from District 1, does. His district is the most dramatically affected. He did support the referendum to increase the number of districts, and his district has seen dramatic population growth, so he would have seen this coming. In other election-related news, District 15 delegate Kathleen Dumais is on Governor Hogan's shortlist for a judgeship on the Circuit Court, which would open her House of Delegate seat. In these situations, the party, in her case the Democrats, get to appoint an interim delegate to complete the rest of her term. As opposed to special elections, appointments like these are an inside game, and whoever gets the party's appointment for the interim will run as an incumbent in the June 2022 primary. State delegates in the county tend to run as a slate of incumbents, making it very hard for challengers to break in. So the stakes couldn't be higher. As of this week's goings-on, the 2 leading contenders for this appointment are Linda Foley, the chair of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, in other words, the chair of the county's Democratic Party itself, and former state delegate Saqib Ali, who was already running for a District 15 seat even before the possibility of the Dumais vacancy became widely known. The other interim appointment will be for Pat O'Neill's old seat on the County Board of Education. The BOE makes that appointment and has sought candidates from O'Neill's old district that centered on Bethesda, Chevy Chase, and Potomac. No news about who has applied yet, but this should be an interesting process to follow as well. Maryland's choice of choosing interim electeds tend to be less open to public input than other states which have special elections. Worth mentioning that the state delegate from Baltimore and now candidate for comptroller Brooke Learman went to a Safeway store and found sweet potatoes individually wrapped in plastic. She called it insane in a tweet. I will not only agree but suggest that you do not buy individual produce wrapped in plastic. I make this mistake often enough with Costco cucumbers, but all it does is add to plastic in our waterways and oceans. On a short note, Larry Hogan launched his Refund the Police campaign with $150 million to give to police departments across the state. We'll be looking at this closely, but more important to note that the problem in Maryland politics for the next year or two is going to be one of budgetary plenty. Time to plan your visits to Annapolis now. I'll be back with Abhi Janamanchi, Senior Minister at the Cedar Lane Universalist Unitarian Church, and Steven Cenname, Sunday school teacher at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Rockville. You're listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Abhi Janamanchi, Steven Cenname, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you, Sunil. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Sunil. It's good to be here.
All right. Can you take just a minute to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do, your pastoral settings or what. Abhi, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm Abhi Janamanchi. My pronouns are he, him. I serve as senior minister at Cedar Lane Unitarian-Universalist Church in Bethesda. Congregation of about 800 adults and children located in Montgomery County. And we are a progressive religious community that is coming out of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, which is a progressive faith that has its roots in North America, starting out in the 19th century, and is actually the consolidation of two religious groups, the Unitarians and the Universalists. And therein hangs a tale.
Stephen?
My name is Steven Cenname. I am also a Catholic Sunday school teacher at St. Mary's in Rockville. It is the largest Catholic parish in the county, and it was at one point the largest in the diocese, but I'm not so sure that's true anymore.
How were your congregations affected by COVID? Abhi, you want to start? Our
congregation was affected by COVID as the larger community was. When it struck, we went offline in terms of shutting the community down. The building was closed, but we quickly reopened online and moved through that transition pretty well. Within a matter of days, actually. In part because we already had a system, where we used to, live stream our services. So transitioning completely online, was not that difficult to transition. It was more the programming, the rest of the programming that the congregation was engaged in, that we had to figure out a way to make that more accessible, via Zoom and other social media platforms like Facebook and YouTube. And the community itself, was impacted. We had people who were, who tested positive. We had members who passed away from COVID in the ensuing months, and the community was impacted, by the pandemic, both health-wise, socially, and emotionally, in terms of being cut away or cut off from each other, and not being able to connect in the usual ways. But one of the things we ended up having to figure out and implement, which actually worked out, was rebuilding connections differently, which included setting up essentially a telephone tree, which sounds archaic, but people reaching out to one another in their neighborhoods, and checking in on people, especially those who live alone, doing that on a regular basis, and finding out what the needs were, and creating a system by which we were delivering meals and medicines to some of our members who were unable to do that. So it actually brought the community closer in a way that we had not imagined before. I feel grateful for, in terms of the crisis presenting an opportunity by which we were able to rebuild community.
Okay. Steven?
Okay, absolutely. So when COVID first hit, obviously the church was completely shut down. Sunday school was in the middle of the year. We just stopped, and for the remaining of that year, we didn't even know how to do any teaching on Zoom. So I just assigned a bunch of readings and homework, and then
by mail, by email. How did you do that?
By email, yeah, by email. I'm just saying, read this part of the book, and then do these, and then take screenshots and then send them back to me. So it's actually kind of a funny story, because I first sent the homework for the rest of the year in one email. And I'm just like, there's no due dates, just do this whenever. And then they all thought it was oh, you have to do this all at once. No, this is for the rest of the year. So when it first started, we obviously couldn't go to mass every week. So they encouraged, by they, I mean, the priests and the clergy encourage us to just watch mass on YouTube however we can. And it was usually one was broadcast from the shrine in DC, but it was actually kind of cool to be able to watch masses from all over the country. My wife and I one week watched an old school Latin style mass, and that was pretty interesting. Watching mass on TV is convenient. It's you don't have to get up as early, but the community aspect's missing there, and that's a very important aspect. And also, there's also, you can't really receive communion either, which is our most important sacrament, cornerstone of the church and all. So there just wasn't mass in person for a while, and I don't think St. Mary's started having it until October or November. For the Christmas masses, so obviously the first Easter for COVID, they said just watch the mass from the shrine, and then the Christmas masses, they had to cap attendance, and you had to reserve your spot ahead of time, which for mass is really, really weird. So you had to reserve it ahead of time, and we actually bought 2 tickets, but because of other plans, we ended up not going. The mass has changed a lot at St. Mary's. We still, even to this day, the choirs aren't practicing, so the music is just one person singing, which is nice, but it's not as nice as having an entire choir. The altar servers have not returned yet, so there's the candles aren't really lit, and it takes a lot out of the opening procession. It's just like the priests in the book. It actually, without a lot of music, it makes the mass go more quickly, but I like the music. And Yeah, so Sunday school, then the first full year with the new normal was on Zoom. To put it frankly, the kids didn't learn crap. Remote learning is extremely difficult, and after they've just had it for 5 days, they really, really didn't want to do it on a Sunday morning, and I frankly don't blame them. A lot of them would just have their cameras off the whole time. Getting them to participate was like pulling teeth, and it was just hard to teach it too. A lot of times it felt like I was doing a podcast instead of teaching a class. I was just talking about stuff I was putting on the slide that was in the textbook and just getting absolutely no response. And a lot of times it felt like they were just listening to a podcast, because I know they were probably just playing games, watching anime in the background because they had their cameras off.
I see that all the time. But it's an interesting question. Did you try to change your approach to teaching and all of that, or what did you? I mean, this obviously is a problem, but
yes.
you are obviously trying to overcome those problems. What is there a way that you thought about it and you tried to overcome it?
A little bit. I said I'm not a trained teacher at all. Like being a Sunday school teacher, the requirements aren't quite as high as being a public school teacher, or even a private school teacher during the regular school week. But a lot of the resources that were available to me, like supplies for activities. I like doing skits, so you can't really. That's out of the question on Zoom. There's a lot of those weren't available to me, so I just basically just made slides of important points in the book. YouTube was a godsend. YouTube was fun. Watching a lot of the videos, a lot of them that were made during the pandemic for this very reason, was extremely helpful.
There seems to be a difference in how Cedar Lane dealt with the pandemic and how St. Mary's dealt with the pandemic. What do you think is what's behind that?
A couple of things. In our case, we had very similar situation like Stephen describes with our children and our families, especially the children and youth, being Zoom fatigued. We coined the term Zoombies, just because of how it was draining, and they're not wanting any more screen time on Sundays as well. So we had to reimagine how we do our religious education programming, and actually, chuck the word Sunday school out, to create more connection and opportunities to feel that sense of community. So we shifted, what used to be our children's chapel to make it family worship, and just for 20 minutes every Sunday morning, which was an opportunity for families to gather around on Zoom and to be together, and then do some things, including music. Our music ministry team adapted. They just went to providing music on Zoom for these kinds of services. Our choir went online, so they were recording pieces online. Using the different apps that we have for small groups and choral groups. And so we adapted those to basically redo worship and redo religious education in ways that was more in keeping with the reality and the needs, and still recognizing that it was not bringing a lot of people, but at least creating a container in which people could gather in meaningful ways. We shifted our adult education programming, for example, to create knitting groups that came that came together every Friday, and people just sat together and knitted on their Zoom screens and chatted, or did different creative things. We sent out packages to families, to their homes, to work on projects, which in turn, we would create space for them to come together and share what they were creating. Every year we do a craft fair before the holidays, a holiday craft day, where families would gather. About 250 people would gather on campus and do various holiday crafts. Well, we took that completely on Zoom. It was wild. It was beautiful to see people in their homes working together on things. And, even we had Santa show up. We engaged in a cacophonous singing of carols, which was, amazing, because at one point everybody turned on their, unmuted themselves. And I think that was one of the best versions of Jingle Bells I've ever heard in my life. The point being, I think part of it is who we are as a progressive religious faith, where we are not bound by creed or set in traditions that somehow don't give us the ability to maneuver. So we were able to throw things out that didn't work and use the raw stuff of our existence as is now to build something provisional that worked and gave us the opportunity to still be engaged as a religious community. And that to me mattered more than trying to create the perfect worship service or the perfect religious education program or the perfect social justice effort, because it was more about connection than perfection. And to me, that stands out as to how we were still able to function very effectively and continue doing church, but doing it differently.
Stephen, when you hear Abhi, do you think y'all missed a trick? Or, that you didn't, that you felt constrained by whatever sort of tradition in order and were not able to innovate? Is that your interpretation?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Catholic Church is not exactly known for its for straying from traditions.
Well, but we were in an extraordinary situation. We were in an emergency, right? And it would sort of, being a pastor, being a minister, involves making those choices. But it seems that St. Mary's was not able to make some of those choices, but Cedar Lane was. And I'm just curious where you think, what might have been different.
Well, yeah, the Catholic Church is definitely sticks to their traditions, no matter how unusual some of the circumstances get. There's one kid in my Sunday school class. His father was undergoing cancer treatment, so the only times that last year and the only times last school year that we met in person was for confession twice a year, once before Christmas and once before Easter. So I was like, obviously this one family was being much more careful than all my other students. So I went to the director. It's like, could he possibly maybe do his confession on Zoom? That was absolutely 100% no way, never.
Oh.
Well, confession is supposed to be a very, sacred moment between the person confessing, the priest who acts as an intercessor to God, and doing that on Zoom, they would feel the risk of something like, I don't know, getting hacked or something.
No, but it's real. I mean, it's not like we are making this up. It is, I mean, clearly the clergy felt like that. Clearly, if you think that communion is the center of Mass and you can't have communion, then why rearrange the deck chairs? I mean, it's not a throwaway argument. We have to take it seriously. The question I have is that as a lay leader of in a big church in Montgomery County, do you think that we could, the Catholic Church could be, I mean, in particular St. Mary's could be moving in a somewhat expedited direction towards more technology and sort of adaptation and all of that?
I think so. I said they once the pandemic was going on for a couple of months, they did start recording their own masses instead of us just having to watch Mass from the Shrine or Ohio.
Was that better? I mean, was that better? Why would that be better?
I think there's more of a sense of home there in a way.
Okay.
Yeah, which is certainly important, and in a way, I think absolutely we could have used the tools available a little more effectively. But you also have to keep in mind, Catholics have a very older fan base, and anytime you go to Mass, you're going to see a disproportionate, slightly older than average age, and asking them to get used to all these technological tools overnight is like my dad's 88. So he would watch Mass on YouTube every now and then, but asking him to do anything much more difficult than that is not good for anyone.
So, Abhi, do you see an age difference between your congregation and general Catholic congregations? I mean, are you guys younger?
No. So, lest Stephen thinks somehow that they have the copyright on that one, I just want to correct that. we have a pretty fairly senior congregation. We did not engage a considerable number of our members who really did not feel connected or able to connect in this way. So we had to come up with other ways of at least keeping in touch with them. But the reality is, people who are showing up for worship or some of our programming online were a small group of people in terms of the percentage of the congregation. And the flip side of it is that our congregation's identity, or in that sense, our parish, went from being local, that was, Bethesda, Kensington, Wheaton oriented, to being a global community. Because we started drawing people from other UU congregations in the region and around the country, and people from other countries who were tuning into our services. So especially, when we did services that, had an Indian theme or came out of the Hindu tradition, for example, we had people from India who were joining us on YouTube, which was wonderful. And then we started getting members who live in other parts of the country or in Europe, for example, who started joining the congregation and felt a sense of belonging. And were comfortable joining us, pretty much recognizing that they may never set foot physically in the congregation ever, but that they are a part of the community and could still be connected online, which, was kind of interesting to hold the tension between these realities that were unfolding at the same time. What has happened is our multi-platform worship has now called us to create a way of being a community in person and online. So if you walk into our sanctuary now, you'll be greeted with these pretty fancy cameras that are on the floor, and then chairs that are spaced, a few feet from each other. And then these very large 80 plus inch televisions that are staring at you. So the sanctuary that used to be such a reflective space has now been transformed differently. I'm not saying it's no longer reflective, it is different, which is what people are now learning to be with, and they're all masked. We don't sing hymns anymore. We announce that please sing loudly with your inside voices as we sing this congregational hymn. So basically, people are just humming to themselves when we sing hymns these days. Our choir doesn't perform live. We are still showing recorded versions of our choir singing. We only have soloists or instrumentalists who sing. At the most, we have 2 or 3 people who sing, but even that, they're all masked. But we also have changed some things. So, for example, when people arrive these days, we have a small group of our choir that sits outside and welcomes them in song. What a beautiful way to come to church. Our religious education programming, at least for the elementary grades, now happens outdoors. They're no longer situated downstairs, they're upstairs. That's the first thing you encounter when you walk in, and the energy is incredible. I love it. When I walk in to see our children spread out in their different programs, sitting around, chatting, running around, making a mess and freaking adults out, that's joy. I love it. So, going to a wonderful metaphor that I resonate with, the metaphor of Easter, that you have to die in order to be reborn again. And what we are dying to is the old form of church, the institutional form. And we are being reborn to something new, which is wonderful, which is exciting, which is scary. But to me, that is the essence of what a religious life calls us to be open to growth.
So, Stephen, when did you all go back in person?
Might have even been as early as August, September of last year, I think is when they started, but masses were social distance, like no more than 2 families in 1 pew. Masks required. Masks are still required. No singing, no chorus, which is still the case. The idea of a chorus singing on a screen is actually a pretty good idea. I wish they would do that. Maybe I'll make that suggestion. In terms of the mass, there's still masks. Attendance is right where it was before COVID. There's only usually one singer who sings a psalm and the parts of the mass, but not the opening and closing hymns, which are the most participatory. There's no hymnals, no missals, so we don't have to follow along with the readings anymore.
Has the practice of communion changed?
Well, the line is social distance, so the ushers do a good job of making sure everyone's in the line stays 6 feet apart, even though they were sitting less than 6 feet apart in the pew. There's also less Eucharistic ministers, so the middle as opposed to before when there'd be Eucharistic ministers in each aisle, it's now just the priest, Eucharistic minister in one, and then they go to the left side, the right side. So it takes a while. In terms of Sunday school, we have all the desks are socially distanced. Everything's disinfected afterwards. Masks are required, and it's hard sometimes after after a huge tragedy like this to get people believing again sometimes, and that's going to be a challenge for certainly the Sunday school teachers for older grades.
Yeah, so that's interesting, actually. Abhi, are you seeing a crisis of spirituality as well that I think Stephen just described?
I don't know if I would call it a crisis as much as there being certainly a level of disconnect. And one of the things that we have seen that has really impacted our community is with our youth. Our youth are less engaged now than they were before. We were not successful in getting them to meet regularly online. And even now, after we have returned, we're only seeing a few youth who are coming back. The same with our young adults.
There is no vaccine mandate at St. Mary's, right? There's no vaccine mandate at Sunday school.
The teachers do have to be vaccinated, yes.
But what about students?
Not that I don't think so.
I mean, are you seeing any vaccine hesitancy in your congregation, or is that not even an issue?
Not as much. We have pretty much a significant majority of the congregation that has been vaccinated, that can be vaccinated. And while we don't have a vaccine mandate, we strongly urge people who can be vaccinated to be vaccinated, and require it for all our staff and all our volunteers who are working with children and youth, and also who are meeting in groups like the choir.
Stephen,
I haven't seen any vaccine hesitancy, at least not in St. Mary's. I know in other parts of the country, some Catholics are trying to use it as a religious exemption. There is nothing in Catholic doctrine that says you can't get this vaccine. In fact, the Pope said to get it.
On that note, Stephen and Abhi, thank you very much for coming on I Hate Politics. I hope you'll come back and, talk more about how your congregations are doing in the coming months. What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Steven Cenname and Abhi Janamanchi? The difference between Cedar Lane UU and St. Mary's Catholic Church seems remarkable, but I don't want to generalize beyond a point. And I really don't want to revisit Max Weber's argument about the deficiencies of Catholicism. It is worth remembering that while Abhi Janamanchi has a pastor's perspective, Steven Cenname is a lay leader, and St. Mary's clergy would have their own story about the struggles they faced and overcame. There may be other Catholic congregations which better pivoted to the demands of the pandemic than St. Mary's did. And there are similarities, even with the big differences. Youth ages 13 to 25 were particularly hard to reach and remain so today. This is a big lesson for schools and universities. Yet, for someone who was not expecting to hear about denominational differences, these differences between St. Mary's and Cedar Lane are remarkable. Cedar Lane was able to pivot quickly. St. Mary's was not. Cedar Lane went virtual with ease and comfort, while St. Mary's found it hard to do. Cedar Lane wants to redefine spirituality, while St. Mary's remains traditional. And with all those differences, you know what I see? Pews are full in St. Mary's, while in Cedar Lane, the very possibility of a robust digital service may be keeping some folks home. So many of us try so hard to make civic participation easier. But I've often wondered if by lowering the barriers of entry, we don't also lower commitment, and make community more ephemeral. If you went back to church or your religious institution early in the pandemic, please send us a voice letter saying why. And if you are still staying away for reasons other than health, let us know as well. We'd love to hear from you. That's all for this episode. You've been listening to I Hate Politics. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. Music for this episode comes from Two Truths, a Rochester, New York-based electronic Americana band with roots in Montgomery County. Garrett Mader and Blake Pattingale composed the music, with Max Greenberg on keyboards and Byron Cage on drums. The band's first EP, Electric Campfire, comes out this month. If you want to share your music on the podcast or know someone else who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.
As I be over the threshold.